Most people think betrayal sounds like a scream, but real treachery is a whisper. I was standing right there, holding a glass of tepid champagne, when my mother leaned in and told my father to have my brother go change the locks at my apartment. She smiled like she was discussing charity. They assumed I was still their obedient little fixer. They had no idea I had already swapped the rules of the game hours ago. My name is Stella Miller, and for 34 years, I have been less of a daughter and more of a contingency plan. In the sprawling, manicured narrative of the Miller family, I am the unspoken clause in the contract, the unpaid accountant, and the operational sponge that absorbs the toxic spillover of our collective reputation. I am the operations and compliance manager at Irongate Freight Systems by day, but by night and on weekends, I am the fixer who ensures the cracks in our family portrait never show in high definition. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. The gala at Briarcrest Hall was a masterclass in aggressive opulence. The ballroom was suffocatingly beautiful, filled with the scent of white lilies and the metallic tang of expensive ambition. 500 guests milled about under chandeliers that cost more than my annual salary, sipping champagne that tasted like crisp apples and old money. The lighting was a warm, flattering gold, designed to smooth out wrinkles and hide the truth, which made it the perfect environment for my parents. My mother, Diane, stood near the center of the room, radiating the kind of benevolence that was usually tax-deductible. She wore a silver gown that shimmered like mercury, her hand resting possessively on the arm of my father, Russell. He stood there like a statue of power, a man who believed the world existed solely to be paved over and redeveloped. Together, they looked like royalty. They looked like the perfect American success story. I stood about 10 feet away, holding a glass of sparkling water that I had been nursing for 45 minutes. My role at these functions was always the same. I was the visible, invisible presence. I was there to handle the donors who had had too much to drink, to steer the conversation away from Blake's failed business ventures, and to ensure the photographers got the right angles of my mother's jewelry. I was wearing a navy blue dress, professional and unobtrusive, designed to blend into the velvet curtains. I was not the star. I was the crew. The room was loud, a cacophony of polite laughter and clinking crystal, but I have always had a talent for hearing things I am not supposed to hear. It is a survival mechanism I developed early, somewhere between my 7th birthday and the time I realized my brother's tuition was an investment while mine was an expense. I watched my mother lean in close to my father. She kept her smile fixed on a local judge standing 3 feet away, a dazzling display of teeth and charm, but her body language shifted. Her shoulders tightened. She tilted her head just enough to direct her voice into my father's ear without breaking eye contact with her audience. I stepped closer, ostensibly to grab a napkin from a passing waiter, but really to tune into the frequency of their conspiracy. While everyone is here, tell your son to go change the locks at her apartment. The sentence hung in the air between us, invisible and heavy. She did not stutter. She did not hesitate. There was no tremor of guilt in her tone, only the flat, efficient delivery of a CEO ordering a redundancy. She said it as if she were reminding him to pick up dry cleaning. I froze. For a fraction of a second, the noise of the party dropped away, leaving me in a vacuum of absolute silence. Tell your son, not our son, your son. That was always the code. When Blake did something wonderful, he was her boy. When he had to do the dirty work, or when he was in trouble, he belonged to Russell. And the object of the sentence was just as telling. Her apartment, not Stella's apartment, just her apartment, a distinct, detached asset that needed to be secured. I watched my father. He did not look surprised. He simply gave a microscopic nod, the kind of gesture that sealed deals in back rooms. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and retrieved his phone. His thumbs moved quickly, typing out a message. Across the room, near the open bar. My brother Blake felt his pocket vibrate. Blake Miller was 2 years older than me and 10 years less mature. He was the golden boy, the heir apparent who had never actually run anything other than a trust fund into the ground. He looked at his phone, frowned slightly, and then looked over at our parents. Russell gave him a sharp, meaningful look. Blake nodded. He set his drink down on a high table, adjusted his jacket, and began to weave his way toward the exit. He did not look at me. He walked with the confident stride of a man who knows he is protected by a safety net woven from other people's money. I did not panic. I expected to feel panic. I expected the hot flush of humiliation or the stinging tears of betrayal that used to come when I was 20 and still believed that if I just worked hard enough, they would love me as much as they loved him. But at 34, those tears were dry. Instead, a strange, metallic calm washed over me. It started at the base of my spine and radiated outward, cooling my skin, steadying my pulse. It was the same feeling I got at Irongate when a compliance audit revealed a major discrepancy. It was not fear, it was focus. So, they had chosen the nuclear option. They were going to lock me out. They were going to physically bar me from the space I had called home for 6 years, likely to seize the documents I kept there, or perhaps just to remind me who held the leash. They thought they were being clever. They thought that by doing this now, while I was trapped here playing the dutiful daughter in front of 200 witnesses, they would catch me off guard. They thought I would come home tonight, tired and unsuspecting, to find my key refusing to turn. They were wrong. My phone vibrated against my thigh. It was not a text message or a social media notification. It was a specific, rhythmic pulse, too long, one short, that I had configured for my home security system. I casually turned away from the crowd, shielding my device with my body as I slipped it out of my clutch. I brought the screen up to my face, keeping my expression bored and neutral. Critical alert, administrative access requested, main entry, source manual override keypad. Time 8:42 in the evening. I unlocked the phone and opened the smart home application. I had installed the system myself 3 months ago, paying the installation fees in cash, and registering the account under a pseudonym, separate from the family plan my mother insisted we all use. She thought I was using the legacy security system she paid for. She thought she had the master code. She did not know that the legacy system was a decoy, disconnected from the actual locking mechanism. I tapped into the live camera feed. The video quality was crisp, 4K resolution streaming directly to my device over an encrypted connection. There he was. Blake stood in the hallway of my apartment building in downtown, looking impatient. He was not alone. Standing next to him was a man in a gray jumpsuit, holding a heavy tool bag, a locksmith, not a reputable one, either. He looked like the kind of guy who did cash jobs after midnight and asked no questions. I watched on the small screen as Blake gestured imperiously at my door. I could not hear the audio through the ambient noise of the party, but the body language was clear. He was acting the part of the frustrated owner. He was probably telling the locksmith that his sister had lost her mind, or lost her keys, or that he was the landlord conducting an emergency inspection. The locksmith knelt. He pulled a drill from his bag. My thumb hovered over the Deny Access button on my screen. I could trigger the alarm right now. I could set off a siren that would deafen them and summon the precinct police within 5 minutes. I could speak through the two-way audio and tell Blake exactly what I thought of him. I could ruin their little covert operation before the first screw was turned. But I did not. I lowered my thumb. If I stopped them now, it would just be a family squabble. It would be a misunderstanding. They would spin it. They would say they were worried about my safety, or that there was a gas leak, or that I was hysterical and imagining things. They would gaslight me, and because they were the Millers and I was just Stella, people would believe them. I needed more than a trespassing attempt. I needed a completed act. I needed undeniable proof of unauthorized entry and alteration of property. I needed them to cross the line so thoroughly that there was no way to walk it back. I watched the drill bite into the metal of the lock. The locksmith was fast. He knew what he was doing. Blake was leaning against the wall, checking his watch, looking bored. He had no idea he was being recorded. He had no idea that every second of this footage was being uploaded simultaneously to a cloud server in Switzerland and a hard drive in a safety deposit box across town. A waiter passed by with a tray of fresh champagne. I reached out and took a glass. The crystal was cold against my fingertips. I looked back at my parents. Diane was laughing at something the judge said, her head thrown back, her neck exposed. Russell was shaking hands with a property developer, looking smug and secure. They thought I was their pawn. They thought I was the safe, reliable, boring Stella who would fix their messes and never create one of her own. They had sent their favorite son to dismantle my life while they drank vintage wine, thinking that when I found out, I would come crying to them, begging to be let back in. They forgot that I was the one who handled the compliance paperwork. They forgot that I was the one who read the fine print. They forgot that for 10 years, I had been the one cleaning up the trails they left behind, which meant I knew exactly how to lay a trail of my own. I looked down at the phone one last time. The locksmith was pulling the old core out of the door. The deed was physically done. They had breached the perimeter. "Go ahead," I whispered to the screen, my voice lost under the swell of a string quartet playing Mozart. "Change the locks. Replace the deadbolt. Do a good job." I took a sip of the champagne. It was dry, sharp, and perfect. I did not need a key to get into that apartment. I did not need to sleep there tonight. Let them have the 4 walls. Let them think they had won this round. By changing those locks, they had just confirmed intent. They had just provided the physical evidence I needed to prove that this was not a family dispute, but a coordinated effort to dispossess me. I slipped the phone back into my clutch and smoothed the fabric of my dress. I raised my chin. I walked back toward the crowd, my heels clicking a steady, martial rhythm on the marble floor. I would finish the night. I would smile. I would shake hands. I would play the role of the dutiful daughter for exactly 2 more hours. And while they toasted to their own cleverness, I would be mentally drafting the affidavit that would bring this entire house of cards crashing down. They wanted to lock me out, fine. I was about to lock them in. To understand why I did not scream when I saw my brother drilling into my front door, you have to understand the history of that door. You have to understand the specific, suffocating weight of what my mother calls generosity. 6 years ago. That apartment was presented to me as a graduation gift when I finished my master's degree in business administration. It was a beautiful pre-war unit in the city center, with high ceilings and crown molding that looked like icing on a wedding cake. I remember the day my mother, Diane, handed me the keys. We were standing in the empty living room, the sunlight streaming in through the bay windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She had cupped my face in her hands, her diamonds pressing cold against my cheek, and told me that she wanted me to have a sanctuary. She said that a woman needed a space of her own to build a life. It was a perfect moment. It was also a lie. I never saw the deed. Whenever I asked about the paperwork, about the property taxes or the homeowner association fees, Diane would wave her hand dismissively. She would tell me that my father's office handled the administrative bore. She would say that I should just enjoy the gift and not worry my pretty head about the red tape. Eventually, she gave me a photocopy of the title transfer. It was a blurry Xerox on cheap paper, and I filed it away without looking too closely. I was 28, grateful, and desperate to believe that my parents actually saw me. It was not until 2 years ago that the paint began to peel. I had been working as the operations and compliance manager at Iron Gate Freight Systems, but my unofficial second job was managing the back end of the Miller Community Trust. The trust was the family's crown jewel, a philanthropic vehicle that donated to art museums, opera houses, and the occasional children's hospital when the press needed a heartwarming story. To the public, my brother Blake and my parents were the faces of the trust. They attended the galas. They cut the ribbons. I was the one in the back office ensuring the spreadsheets balanced and the tax filings were submitted on time. I was the invisible employee, unappreciated and unpaid, doing the work because I thought it was my duty to the family legacy. It started with a discrepancy of $12,500. It was a consulting fee paid out in mid-October. I was reconciling the quarterly ledger late one Tuesday night, my eyes burning from the blue light of the monitor. The payment was listed under Strategic Advisory Services, a vague category that could mean anything from legal counsel to a golf trip disguised as a board meeting. The recipient was a vendor I did not recognize. SM Advisory. I paused. SM. Stella Miller. It felt like a coincidence. I told myself it was just a coincidence, but my compliance training kicked in. A reflex honed by years of catching shipping errors and invoice fraud at Irongate. I dug deeper. I pulled the vendor profile. The tax identification number was new, registered only 18 months prior. I cross-referenced the payment history. There was a monthly outflow of exactly $12,500 to SM Advisory, starting the very month the trust had received a large influx of capital from a government grant. Then I looked at the incorporation documents for SM Advisory. My stomach turned over. A slow, sickening rotation. The registered agent was a lawyer I knew my father used for his more aggressive real estate deals. But the principal officer listed on the formation documents was me, Stella Marie Miller. My name was there, my social security number was there, and at the bottom of the page was my signature. It was a loop-for-loop recreation of my autograph, the one I used on official contracts. But as I zoomed in on the PDF, the pixels gave it away. It was too perfect. It was identical to the signature I had used on my employment contract with the trust 5 years ago, right down to the microscopic ink skip on the capital M. It had been scanned, lifted, and pasted onto this document. I did not stop there. I began to pull the email logs and the compliance forms associated with SM Advisory. There were dozens of approvals, all authorized by Stella Miller, confirming receipt of services that never happened, signing off on risk assessments that were never conducted. I checked the metadata. Every single one of those approvals had been time-stamped when I was physically accounted for elsewhere. One was signed while I was on a flight to Chicago for an Irongate conference. Another was signed at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday when I was asleep in my bed. But the most damning piece of data was the IP address. The digital fingerprint of the computer used to create SM Advisory and approve these fraudulent invoices did not match my laptop. It did not match my office network. It matched the static IP address of the main server at Briarcrest Hall, my parents' estate, and occasionally, it matched the mobile data signature of a phone registered to Blake Miller. They were using my identity to siphon money out of the trust. They were funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars into a shell company that bore my initials, using my stolen signature to authorize it. I remember the day I confronted my mother. It was a Sunday afternoon, 3 days after my discovery. I found her in the solarium, arranging white hydrangeas in a crystal vase. She looked serene, the picture of maternal grace. I placed the printouts on the glass table. I did not yell. I asked her, with a trembling voice, why there was a company in my name receiving money I never saw. Diane did not look at the papers. She snipped the stem of a hydrangea with a sharp, decisive click of her shears. She looked at me with a gaze that was terrifyingly empty of surprise. She told me that I was overreacting. She said it was just a tax efficiency structure my father's accountants had set up. She said it was to build a nest egg for me, that the money was being held in escrow. I asked her why I had no access to the account. I asked her why my signature had been forged. She sighed, as if I were a toddler asking why the sky was blue. She placed the flower in the vase and wiped her hands on a linen towel. Then she looked me in the eye and delivered the sentence that finally killed the daughter in me and woke up the auditor. She told me that I was good at the small things. She said I was excellent at following rules, but I did not understand the big picture of how wealth was preserved. She told me to go home and let the men handle the business. That was the moment I knew. I went back to the incorporation papers of SM Advisory. I looked at the registered business address. It was not a P.O. box. It was not my father's office. It was my apartment. The gift, the sanctuary she had given me was not a home. It was a drop box. It was a physical address for a shell corporation designed to launder money. They had given me the apartment so that if the IRS or the Department of Justice ever came knocking, the warrant would be served at my door. The raid would happen in my living room. The evidence, whatever fake invoices or ledgers they needed to plant, would be found in my possession. I was not just a daughter, I was a scapegoat in waiting. They were fattening me up with a rent-free apartment so that when the time came to slaughter the calf to save the herd, I would be right there, legally tied to the crime scene. That was why the lock change tonight was so critical. I had begun to quietly move my things out weeks ago, bit by bit, replacing them with decoys. But I knew they were sensing the pressure. The trust was due for an external audit next month, one that I had insisted on in a board meeting. Much to my father's annoyance, they needed to clean house. They needed to make sure that the physical location of SM Advisory contained exactly what they needed it to contain. If they controlled the locks, they controlled the narrative. I had gone to a lawyer 2 days ago. He was a shark of a man, expensive and mean, with no connection to the Miller social circle. I laid it all out for him, the forged signatures, the shell company, the deed I never saw. He had looked at me over his spectacles and told me that possession was 9/10 of the law, but intent was everything else. He told me that if they changed the locks while I was still the legal resident, even without a deed, it was an illegal eviction. But more importantly, if we could prove they entered the apartment to plant or destroy evidence, we could flip the entire RICO case on them. He warned me. He said that if I let them do this, if I let them break in, I was inviting chaos into my life. He said they would claim I was unstable. He said they would claim I stole the money myself. I told him I was counting on it. So, as I stood in the ballroom watching the video feed of my brother overseeing the destruction of my front door lock, I was not thinking about the furniture I had left behind. I was thinking about the hidden cameras I had installed in the crown molding. I was thinking about the servers I had remotely wiped. I was thinking about the fact that by the time Blake walked into that apartment, he would be walking onto a stage I had set. The apartment was never mine. I knew that now. It was a cage. But my mother forgot one crucial thing about cages. If you stay in one long enough, you learn exactly how the lock works, and you learn that sometimes the person holding the key is not the one who is safe. The person holding the key is just the one who has to answer for what is found inside. I took another sip of champagne. The liquid was warm now, but I barely tasted it. My phone buzzed again, a notification from the motion sensor in my hallway. Entry detected. The game had officially moved from preparation to execution. They were inside, and they had no idea that the small things my mother mocked, the timestamps, the IP logs, the compliance forms were about to become the biggest things in their lives. They had stolen my name to build a lie. Now, I was going to use the truth to take it back. Preparation is not about predicting the future. It is about understanding the variables of the present so thoroughly that the future becomes a mathematical inevitability. My family operates on impulse and arrogance. They believe that power is a shield that deflects consequences. I operate on audit trails and redundancy. I believe that power is a liability unless it is documented, filed, and backed up on an encrypted server 3 states away, while my mother was busy selecting the floral arrangements for the Briarcrest Gala, and my father was curating the guest list to maximize political leverage. I was busy turning my apartment into a sensory deprivation tank for the truth. I had anticipated this move for months. The moment I found the discrepancies in the Miller Community Trust ledgers, I knew the apartment would become the focal point of their damage control. They viewed it as a safe house for their secrets. I viewed it as a honeypot. 3 weeks ago, I took a personal day from Irongate. I told my assistant I had a migraine. In reality, I spent 14 hours inside the apartment with a freelance security contractor who specialized in corporate espionage defense. We did not just install cameras. We installed an ecosystem of surveillance designed to be invisible to the naked eye, but legally admissible in a court of law. There were 4 pinhole cameras concealed within the apartment. One was embedded in the smoke detector in the hallway. One was hidden in the spine of a fake vintage encyclopedia on the bookshelf. One was integrated into the motion sensor of the thermostat. And the most important one was positioned inside the vent of my home office, angled perfectly to capture the screen of my desktop computer and the face of anyone sitting in front of it. But visual evidence is rarely enough for people like the Millers. They would claim the video was doctored. They would claim context was missing. So I built a digital trap to match the physical one. In my home office, sitting prominently on the desk, was a server tower. It was a sleek black monolith, with blue LED lights that blinked in a reassuring, rhythmic pattern. It looked like the nerve center of a high-level operation. It hummed with the sound of cooling fans. To Blake, who knew just enough about technology to be dangerous but not enough to be competent, it would look like the jackpot. He would assume that this machine held the local copies of the incriminating trust documents. He would be wrong. The server was a hollow shell. The blinking lights were powered by a simple battery loop. The hard drives inside were formatted, wiped clean, and filled with terabytes of junk data, corrupted video files, endless loops of nonsense code, and thousands of meaningless text documents. The real data. The explosive evidence of the shell company SM Advisory and the money laundering scheme had been migrated weeks ago. It was currently sitting on an air-gapped solid-state drive inside a safety deposit box at a credit union in Jersey City, a bank where no one knew the name Miller. A mirror copy was stored on a cloud server hosted in Iceland, protected by a 64-character password that existed only in my memory. However, a trap needs bait. I knew Blake would not just leave if he found an empty computer. He needed to find something that confirmed his suspicions, something that made him feel like he had won. So, on the laptop I left on the desk, the one I knew he would try to access, I created a desktop folder named Tax Corrections and Board Minutes. Inside that folder, I placed a series of fabricated documents. They were masterpieces of fiction. I drafted emails from myself to a non-existent lawyer, expressing panic about covering up the funds. I created spreadsheets that looked like they were hiding embezzlement. I essentially forged a confession that incriminated me. Why? Because I knew Blake. He would not read them carefully. He would see the file names, panic, and immediately try to delete them or copy them to a flash drive to show our parents. And that was the key. The moment he interacted with those files, keylogger software running in the background would record every keystroke. The system would log the precise time the files were accessed, modified, or deleted. It would prove that he did not just enter the apartment. He actively tampered with what he believed to be legal financial records. I was not just catching a burglar, I was documenting the attempted destruction of evidence. The human element was the next variable. I knew I could not rely on the building's standard security to stop my family. The doorman had received Christmas bonuses from my father for 20 years, but the night shift supervisor was new. I had met him 2 days ago. I didn't bribe him, that would be illegal. Instead, I hired a private investigator named Caldwell, a former NYPD detective with a face like aggressive concrete. To have a chat with him, Caldwell informed the supervisor that there was a potential domestic dispute situation involving a restrained party and that strict adherence to the building's guest log protocol was necessary to avoid liability. I didn't ask them to stop Blake. I asked them to document him. I wanted the logbook to show Blake Miller, an unknown locksmith. I wanted the license plate of the locksmith's van recorded on the perimeter security cameras. I wanted a paper trail that placed my brother at the scene of the crime with the precision of a GPS tracker. Back at the party, the air was getting warmer as more bodies filled the room. I circulated through the crowd, playing the part of the dutiful daughter to perfection. I complimented the mayor's wife on her earrings. I nodded sympathetically as a donor complained about capital gains tax. I ensured the hors d'oeuvres trays were circulating efficiently. Inside, I was vibrating with adrenaline, but on the outside, I was absolute zero. My wristwatch, a high-end smartwatch with a titanium band, was my lifeline. It was not just telling time. It was running a high-fidelity audio recording application in the background. It had been running since I stepped out of the car. That whisper, the one my mother thought was private, was not just a memory. It was a waveform. It was a digital file saved under today's date. Tell your son to go change the locks. I had it. I had the tone, the inflection, and the background noise of the gala. I had the timestamp that correlated exactly with the moment my father took out his phone to text Blake. I checked the time. It was 9:15 in the evening. According to my mental timeline, Blake should be breaching the apartment door right about now. My phone, tucked discreetly in my clutch, gave a single, sharp vibration. This was the silent alarm I had configured. It was distinct from the text message vibration. This specific haptic feedback meant that the magnetic sensor on my apartment's front door had been separated. The door was open. I took a slow sip of my drink. I did not run to the exit. I did not make a scene. A scene would be emotional. A scene would give them a chance to call me hysterical. I needed to be surgical. I walked over to a quiet corner near the catering entrance, ostensibly to check on the dessert service. I pulled out my phone and opened my secure email client. In my drafts folder, there was an email ready to go. The subject line was Urgent Extraordinary Board Meeting Request, Financial Discrepancies and Internal Audit Findings. Attached to this email was a 100-page PDF. It was the dossier I had spent the last 6 months compiling. It contained everything: the flowcharts showing the money moving from the trust to SM Advisory, the side-by-side comparison of my real signature versus the digital forgery, the IP address logs proving the fraudulent approvals came from Briarcrest Hall, the invoices from ghost vendors for consulting services that occurred on federal holidays. The recipients of this email were not just my parents. The list included the entire board of directors of the Miller Community Trust, the external auditors from the firm holding the upcoming review, and the legal counsel for the Nonprofit Oversight Committee. My parents thought they were cleaning up the mess tonight, so they would be safe tomorrow. They thought they were closing the loop. They had no idea that I had already scheduled the execution. I hit send. The email whooshed away, carrying the destruction of their reputation with it. The meeting was set for 8 a.m. tomorrow. By the time my parents woke up, hungover from their champagne and self-satisfaction, their phones would be exploding with calls from terrified board members. They would walk into that boardroom thinking they were coming to fire me, only to find that I had brought the entire mountain down on top of them. I switched apps to the live camera feed. The screen showed my living room in high-definition night vision. The door swung open. Blake stepped in. He looked nervous. He left the locksmith in the hallway and closed the door behind him. He didn't take off his shoes. He walked straight toward my home office, exactly as I predicted. He looked like a man who was doing something he knew was wrong but felt entitled to do anyway. He adjusted his suit jacket, wiped his forehead, and reached for the door handle of the office. I watched him enter the trap. I watched him approach the desk where the decoy computer sat waiting, its blue light pulsing like a heartbeat. I could see him clearly. I could see the sweat on his upper lip. I could see the way his eyes darted around the room, looking for ghosts. I opened my messaging app. I had a contact saved simply as Caldwell. I typed one word, execute. This was the signal for the private investigator, who was parked down the street, to call the precinct. He would report a burglary in progress at my address, confirmed by the resident ME via remote surveillance. He would describe a suspect matching Blake's description. He would provide the entry codes to the lobby to ensure the police did not get stuck at the front door. I put the phone away. I turned back to the party. The band was playing a waltz. My mother was waving at me from across the room, signaling for me to come and meet someone. She looked triumphant. She thought the lock change was done. She thought I was neutralized. I smiled. A genuine, terrifying smile. I walked toward her, my heels sinking slightly into the plush carpet. "Coming, Mother," I said under my breath. The trap was not just set, it was sprung, and the beautiful thing was, they were the ones who had walked into it, closed the door, and turned the key. All I had to do now was wait for the sirens. The locksmith was a professional. I will give him that. On the small, high-definition screen of my phone, concealed beneath the linen napkin on my lap, I watched him apply the finishing touches to his work. He wiped down the brass faceplate of the new smart lock with a rag, effectively polishing the mechanism that was now illegally barring me from my own home. He peeled the backing off a small sticker, probably a warranty seal, or a 24-hour emergency service number, and affixed it neatly to the inside of the doorframe. It was a perverse display of legitimacy. To any passerby in the hallway, this was a standard service call, a homeowner upgrading their security. But I knew the truth. That shiny new lock was not a safety feature. It was a seal on a crime scene. The locksmith gathered his tools, the heavy canvas bag clanking softly. He handed a set of fresh keys to Blake. My brother took them with a nod that lacked gratitude. the entitled dip of the chin he used when a waiter brought him a drink. He said something I could not hear, likely a dismissal. The locksmith stepped out into the hallway. The heavy door clicked shut, and the deadbolt slid home with a mechanical finality that vibrated through the floorboards and into my sensors. Now, Blake was alone, at the gala. The salad course was being cleared. The clatter of silverware on china filled the ballroom, masking the silence in my head. I looked up to see my mother, Diane, laughing at a joke made by the senator's wife. She looked relaxed. Her shoulders had dropped 2 inches since she sent Blake away. She thought the problem was solved. She thought her son was standing guard, a loyal sentry protecting the family assets. I looked back down at my phone. Blake did not stay by the door. He did not sit on the sofa to wait. He did not act like a man who was there to secure the premises. He moved with the frantic energy of a scavenger. He walked straight past the living room, ignoring the expensive art and the electronics. He headed directly for the hallway that led to my home office. This was the behavior I had banked on. If his goal was simply to change the locks and keep me out, he would have sat down and watched television. But he was not there to keep me out. He was there to get something out. He pushed the door to my office open. The room was dark, illuminated only by the rhythmic blue pulse of the server tower I had left as bait and the standby light of the monitor. Blake fumbled for the light switch. The overhead LEDs flared to life, washing the room in a clinical white glare. I switched the camera feed to the one hidden in the ventilation shaft. It gave me a perfect bird's-eye view of the desk. He didn't hesitate. He went straight for the drawers. He pulled them open so hard the wood screeched against the tracks. He began dumping contents onto the floor pens, staplers, old notebooks. He was looking for paper trails. He was looking for the ledgers I had already digitized and secured in Iceland, when the drawers yielded nothing but office supplies. He turned his attention to the closet. I had placed a small, personal safe on the top shelf. It was a cheap model, the kind you buy at a big box store for $50. It looked like the place where a paranoid, amateur accountant would hide her secrets. I watched him drag a chair over, climb up, and haul the heavy metal box down. He set it on the desk with a heavy thud. He didn't have the combination, of course, but Blake had never been one for subtlety. He looked around the room, spotted a heavy letter opener, a brass replica of a sword I had received as a corporate gift, and jammed it into the crack of the door. He pried. He grunted. His face turned a mottled red. It was pathetic and terrifying all at once. This was the future CEO of the Miller Community Trust, attacking a metal box like a vandal. The latch gave way with a snap. Blake threw the lid back. Inside, sitting on a bed of velvet, was a single USB drive. I had labeled it with white tape and written on it in thick black marker, Trust Audit Files. Do not delete. It was the perfect lure. It screamed, incriminating evidence. Blake picked it up. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. He held it up to the light, inspecting it like a diamond. He thought he held my career in his hand. He thought he held the leverage that would force me to sign whatever non-disclosure agreement they put in front of me. He sat down in my desk chair and woke up the laptop. I switched my view to the screen capture software running in the background. I could see exactly what he was seeing. The desktop appeared. He plugged in the USB drive. The antivirus software scanned it clean. Of course, and the folder window popped up. He opened the drive. He saw the files. Ledger v2.xlsx. Email drafts confidential. DocCX. Payout schedule SM advisory. PDF. He didn't open them to read them. He didn't check the contents. He selected all of them. He right-clicked. His mouse hovered over the word delete. I took a sip of my wine. This was the moment. Until now. He was just a trespasser. He was family. He could claim he was looking for a lost item, but deleting financial records, that was destruction of evidence. That was obstruction of justice. That was a felony, regardless of whose name was on the lease. He clicked delete. Then, he went to the recycle bin. He right-clicked again. Empty recycle bin. Are you sure you want to permanently delete these items? The computer asked him. Blake clicked us. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling a long breath. He rubbed his face with his hands. He thought the data was gone. He had no idea that the files were corrupted gibberish I had generated 2 days ago, and that the real record being created was a video file of his actions, tagged with his biometric data and the laptop's system time. He had just digitally signed his own confession, but he wasn't done. He stood up and began to pace the room. He pulled his phone out to text someone, Mom, presumably. Then, the room was washed in a different kind of light. Through the window behind him, red and blue lights began to flash against the ceiling. They strobed rhythmically, cutting through the calm of the apartment. Blake froze. He walked to the window and peered through the blinds. He stepped back quickly, as if burned. The doorbell rang. It wasn't the polite chime of a guest. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding of law enforcement. Bang, bang, bang. Police opened the door. I watched the color drain from Blake's face. It was instantaneous. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the sheer animal panic of a man who has never faced a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. He looked at the door. He looked at the computer. He looked for a back exit that didn't exist. Bang, bang, bang. We have a report of a burglary in progress. Open the door or we will breach. Blake scrambled out of the office. I switched cameras to the living room feed. He practically ran to the front door, smoothing his suit jacket, trying to compose his face into the mask of the golden boy. He unlocked the deadbolt, the brand new deadbolt, and opened the door. 2 uniformed officers stood there. Behind them was a man in a trench coat. Caldwell, my private investigator, looking bored and dangerous. And behind him was the building's night security supervisor, looking terrified. Step back, the first officer commanded, his hand resting on his holster. It's fine, officer, Blake said, his voice cracking slightly before he pitched it lower. I'm Blake Miller. This is my family's apartment. I'm just handling some maintenance. We received a verified report of an unauthorized entry, the officer said, stepping into the foyer. He didn't ask for permission. Are you the leaseholder? My sister is, Blake said quickly. Stella Miller. She's indisposed. My parents own the building well. The trust does. I have permission to be here. Can you show me a key? The officer asked. I just changed the locks, Blake admitted, realizing too late how that sounded. For her safety. You changed the locks on a tenant without her presence. The officer's eyes narrowed. Do you have a work order, a power of attorney, a copy of the deed? I have this, Blake said, fumbling for his phone. He swiped through his gallery with trembling fingers. He held the screen up to the officer's face. I zoomed in with the camera. It was a photo of a text message from my father. Go to the apartment. Handle it. This is a text message, sir, the officer said, unimpressed. This is not legal documentation of residency or ownership. Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back. You can't do this, Blake sputtered. Do you know who my father is, Russell Miller? Call him. He's at Briarcrest Hall. We'll call him from the station, the officer said. He spun Blake around. The click of the handcuffs was audible even through the microphone. It was a sharp, biting sound. As the officer began to pat him down, another officer moved into the apartment, scanning the room with a flashlight. He walked toward the office. Clear the premises, the first officer said. Bag the electronics. We have an allegation of data theft. Blake was protesting loudly now, reciting names of lawyers, threatening lawsuits. I didn't steal anything. I was cleaning up. He stopped. He realized what he had just said. The officer paused. You were deleting, sir. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. They pulled Blake's phone out of his hand to bag it. Just as the officer held it up, the screen lit up with a new notification. The camera in the hallway was high resolution. I could read the text clearly as it popped up on the lock screen. Sender mom message. Don't forget the blue envelope in the bottom drawer. Burn it. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The blue envelope. I knew exactly what that was. It wasn't the USB drive. It was the physical failsafe. My mother, for all her digital maneuvering, was old-fashioned. She kept physical leverage. If she was telling him to burn a blue envelope, it meant there was something in that apartment even I hadn't found yet. Or perhaps something she thought was there. The officer looked at the phone. He read the text. He looked at Blake. "Looks like we have conspiracy," the officer muttered to his partner. "Bag the phone. Keep it on airplane mode." They began to march Blake out. He looked back one last time, his eyes wide and bewildered. He wasn't looking at the apartment. He was looking at the ruin of his life. I watched until the door closed. The apartment was empty again, save for the police officer securing the scene. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a message from Caldwell. Subject detained. Transporting to the 1st Precinct. Intent secured. Video evidence backed up. Do you want me to intercept the parents? I typed back no. Let them finish their dessert. I placed the phone back on the table. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. They had walked into the apartment looking for a way to destroy me. Instead, they had provided the police with a confession, a motive, and a direct line of command from the matriarch of the family. "Is everything all right? Stella." I looked up. A young man from the donor committee was standing there, looking concerned. "You look a million miles away." I smiled at him. It was the warmest smile I had managed all night. "Everything is perfect," I said. "Just checking on a delivery. It arrived exactly on time." I picked up my fork. The cake on my plate was dark chocolate, rich and bitter. I took a bite. It tasted like victory. But the night wasn't over. The police had Blake, but I still had to deal with the woman who sent him, and I had to find out what was in that blue envelope before the police evidence locker swallowed it whole. Or maybe I already knew. My mother's text had just changed the game again. She wasn't just protecting money. She was hiding a body, metaphorically speaking, and she had just told the police exactly where to look for the shovel. The vibration of my phone against my palm was a microscopic earthquake, unnoticed by the 500 guests filling the ballroom of Briarcrest Hall, but seismic to the foundation of my life. I looked down at the screen. The message from Caldwell was concise, professional, and devastatingly final. Subject detained. Transporting to 1st Precinct. Evidence secured. It was done. My brother was in the back of a police cruiser. At that exact moment, the house lights dimmed. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the stage where my mother, Diane Miller, stood before a microphone. She looked magnificent and terrifying, a statue carved from frozen ambition. She raised her champagne flute, the crystal catching the light like a captured star. The room fell into a reverent silence. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice a perfectly calibrated instrument of warmth. "Tonight is about legacy. It is about the future we build for our children, and the sacrifices we make to protect that future." I stood near a pillar, swirling the ice in my glass. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. She was talking about sacrifice while sacrificing me. "As many of you know," Diane continued, her eyes scanning the room with practiced benevolence, "my husband Russell and I have dedicated our lives to the Miller Community Trust, but a legacy is nothing without a successor. Tonight, I wanted to introduce our son, Blake, as the new vice chairman of the board." She paused for effect. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. "However," she said, her smile turning wistful, "Blake could not join us for this toast, even on a night of celebration. He is working. He is currently attending to a critical security matter regarding our family's assets. He is out there right now, ensuring that the foundation of this family remains strong." A round of applause broke out. They were clapping for a felony. They were cheering for a man who had just been arrested for breaking and entering. I watched my father, Russell. He was standing slightly behind her, beaming with pride. He knew exactly where Blake was. He knew Blake was breaking into my apartment. To him, that was security. Diane raised a hand to quiet the room. "And of course," she added, her tone shifting slightly, becoming patronizingly sweet, "we must thank our daughter, Stella." The spotlight swung briefly to find me. I did not flinch. I did not smile. I stood perfectly still. "Stella is here somewhere," Diane said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. She is the heartbeat of our back-end operations. While Blake handles the vision, Stella is the one who makes sure the paperwork is filed. She has always been so good at the little things, the tedious things, the things that keep the lights on so the rest of us can shine. There it was, the public branding. Blake was the vision. I was the janitor. Blake was the architect. I was the bricklayer. She was praising me, but every word was a calculated reduction. She was telling the elite of the city that I was useful, but small, a worker bee who should be grateful for the hive. The applause for me was polite, thinner than the applause for Blake. I saw pity in the eyes of a woman standing near me. She thought I was the lesser Miller. I set my glass down on a passing waiter's tray. The metallic calm I had felt earlier hardened into something colder. It was time to rewrite the script. I pulled out my phone. I opened my text thread with my father. I typed 2 words, coat room. I watched him check his pocket. He frowned, pulled out his phone, and read the message. He looked up, scanning the room until he found me. I locked eyes with him. I did not wave. I did not nod. I simply turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall. My movements were fluid. I felt like I was gliding underwater. I passed the senator, the judge, the real estate tycoons. They were all extras in a scene that was about to be cut. I reached the coat room. It was a small, quiet antechamber, lined with mahogany paneling and filled with the scent of expensive wool and leather. It was empty save for an attendant, a young girl reading a paperback book. "Give us a moment," I said to her. I handed her $100 bill. She looked at the money, looked at my face, and vanished through the service door without a word. A moment later, the main door opened. Russell walked in. He looked annoyed, the way a man looks when his golf game is interrupted by a phone call. "Stella," he hissed, closing the door behind him. "What is this? Your mother is still speaking. It looks terrible for us to be absent." "You need to stop the speech, Dad," I said. My voice was level, stripped of all emotion. "Don't be dramatic," he snapped, adjusting his cufflinks. "Just because she said you're good at administrative work doesn't mean you have to sulk. It's a compliment. You are good at the small things." I walked up to him. I reached out and placed my hand on the lapel of his tuxedo. The fabric was Italian silk, smooth and cool. "Listen to me very carefully," I whispered. "Blake is not securing the family assets. Blake is currently being processed at the 1st Precinct downtown." Russell froze. His face went slack. "What?" "He triggered a silent alarm," I said. "The police arrived while he was trying to pry open a safe in my office. He has been arrested for burglary, unauthorized entry, and attempted destruction of evidence." "That's impossible," Russell stammered, pulling away from me. "We told him to change the locks. It's our property. I'll call the chief of police. I'll have this fixed in 10 minutes. "It's not your property," I said. "And you won't be calling the chief, because the police have the footage." The door opened again. Diane swept in. She had finished her toast. She was glowing with the adrenaline of performance. But the moment she saw Russell's face, the glow vanished. She was a predator. She smelled blood in the water instantly. "What is going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Why are you two hiding in here? The dessert course is being served." "Tell her," I said to Russell. Russell looked at his wife. He looked old suddenly. The statue of power was crumbling. "Blake has been arrested." Diane stared at him. She didn't scream. She didn't gasp. She simply went very, very still. Her eyes darted to me, then back to him. "Arrested," she repeated. "For what? Being in his own sister's apartment." "For breaking and entering," I corrected, "and for trying to delete files from a computer he had no right to touch." "You called the police on your brother?" Diane asked. Her voice dropped to a dangerous register. It wasn't the voice of a mother. It was the voice of a mob boss. "You petty, jealous little girl. Do you have any idea what you have done? You have humiliated us." "I didn't do anything," I said. "I was here, listening to you give a speech about legacy. Blake did this to himself." "Fix it," Diane ordered Russell. "Call the lawyer. Get the charges dropped. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them Stella gave him permission. I did not give him permission, I said clearly. You will say you did. Diane stepped closer to me, her perfume gardenias and musk filling my headspace. You will go down to that station right now and tell them you lost your keys and asked your brother to help. You will sign whatever statement is necessary. No, I said. The word hung in the air. It was the first time in 34 years I had said it to her with zero intention of backing down. Excuse me. Diane's eyes narrowed. I said no. I took my phone out of my clutch. And before you try to lie to the police, you should see what they already have. I held the screen up to them. First, I showed them the log from the smart lock. Access denied. Forced entry detected. Time 9:12. Then, I swiped to the next image. It was a screen capture of the text message Russell had sent Blake earlier that evening. Go to the apartment. Handle it. That's just a text, Russell said, sweat beading on his forehead. It doesn't prove anything illegal. Keep looking, I said. I swiped to the third image. It was the photo the police officer had taken of Blake's phone screen. The one sent to me by my private investigator. Sender mom. Message. Don't forget the blue envelope in the bottom drawer. Burn it. Diane stared at the image. Her face, which had been flushed with anger, drained of color until she looked like the marble statues in the hallway. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The police have this phone, I said softly. They have the chain of custody. They know you directed him to destroy a specific item inside an apartment you do not live in. That is conspiracy. That is tampering with evidence. Russell slumped against the coat check counter. He looked like he was about to be sick. The blue envelope, he whispered. Diane, you said you destroyed that years ago. I kept it as insurance, she hissed at him, momentarily forgetting I was there. In case the audit ever went deep enough. She turned back to me. The mask was gone. There was no mom left in her eyes. There was only the ruthless operator who had run the Miller family like a cartel for 3 decades. She didn't ask if Blake was okay. She didn't ask if I was hurt. She didn't ask how we could heal the family. She looked me dead in the eye and asked the only question that mattered to her. How much did you copy? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Excuse me? I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. The computer, she said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. The files Blake was trying to delete. You set this up. You knew he was coming, which means you knew what was on that drive. How much did you copy before you called the cops? I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, who had just minutes ago called me good at the little things. She wasn't worried about my soul. She was worried about her spreadsheets. She was worried about the trail of money laundering she had built using my name. Everything, I lied. It wasn't technically a lie. I had the real data safely stored in Iceland. But she didn't need to know that the computer Blake attacked was a decoy. I needed her to believe that I held the keys to the kingdom. I have everything. Mother, I said, my voice steady. Every invoice, every forged signature, every dollar funneled into SM Advisory. I have it all. Russell made a sound like a wounded animal. Stella, please, we can work this out. We can pay you, whatever you want. The trust has reserves. This isn't about money. Dad, I said, you can't buy this. You tried to frame me. You set up a shell company in my name so that if the ship went down, I would be the one to drown. And tonight, you sent your son to make sure the evidence was planted. It was business, Diane said coldly. It was survival. You wouldn't understand. You've never had to make the hard choices. I'm making a hard choice right now, I said. Diane took a step toward me. For a second, I thought she might strike me. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. If you release those files, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed the one she had used on the balcony, you will destroy this family. You will burn Briarcrest Hall to the ground. You will be a pariah. No one will hire you. No one will speak to you. I'm not destroying the family, I said. I'm just turning on the lights. If the house burns down because of what you hid in the walls, that's not my fault. I stepped back toward the door. I had what I needed. I had seen the fear in their eyes. I had heard them admit to the existence of the blue envelope. I had confirmed that their only loyalty was to their own survival. "Where are you going?" Russell asked, panic rising in his voice. "I'm going back to the party," I said. "I haven't finished my dessert, and I believe the police will be arriving here shortly to speak with you both. They have some questions about that text message." "Stella," Diane screamed. It was a raw, ugly sound, stripped of all elegance. "You get back here. You are a Miller. You do what you are told." I opened the door. The sound of the string quartet drifted in, playing something light and airy. The chatter of the guests was a warm hum against the cold reality of the coat room. I looked back at them one last time. Diane stood trembling in her silver gown, a queen whose kingdom had just been revealed as a prison. Russell looked broken, leaning against the counter as if his legs could no longer support the weight of his own corruption. "I am a Miller," I said. "That's exactly why I kept receipts." I walked out and let the heavy door click shut behind me, sealing them in their private chamber of panic. I walked back into the ballroom, into the light, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I felt invincible. I did not leave the coat room. I had said my piece, and I had reached for the door handle, but the terrified silence behind me was a gravitational force I could not ignore. I turned back. The heavy oak door remained closed, sealing the three of us in a space that smelled of cedar and impending litigation. The sounds of the party outside were muffled, a distant hum of a world that no longer applied to the people in this room. "You need to see the rest," I said. My voice was devoid of theatrics. It was the voice I used during quarterly compliance reviews when I had to tell a department head that their spending was indefensible. I walked back to the center of the room. Diane was clutching her elbows, her posture rigid. Russell was wiping sweat from his upper lip with a monogrammed handkerchief. "You asked what I copied," I said, looking at my mother. "You asked how much I have. You are worried about the bank transfers. You are worried about the invoices to SM Advisory. But those are just numbers. Numbers can be explained away. Incompetent accountants, clerical errors. You could have spun that." I tapped the screen of my phone and projected a new document. It was a file directory structure, stark white text on a black background. "This," I said, holding the phone up so the light from the crystal sconce hit the screen, "is what makes this prison time, not just a fine." The header on the image read, "Project Stella." Russell squinted. "What is that?" "It is a folder from Blake's personal cloud drive," I explained. "The one synchronized to the laptop he just tried to purge. He thought he was deleting the evidence of the embezzlement, but I had already mirrored his drive 3 days ago when he logged into the Trust's server from his iPad. I swiped to the next image. It was a screenshot of the folder's contents. The file names were chilling in their banality. Draft Confession Stella, Docs X Resignation, Letter Stella M, PDF, Timeline of Errors Stella, XLSX, Psych Eval Notes Fake, Docs X, Project Stella, I read aloud. A complete, prefabricated narrative. You weren't just using my name to steal money, you were building a coffin. I opened the file labeled Draft Confession Stella.docsx. I began to read from the screen. I, Stella Miller, admit that due to personal financial pressures and a lapse in judgment, I unilaterally authorized payments to SM Advisory without the knowledge or consent of the board. I looked up. Diane refused to meet my eyes. She was staring at a spot on the wall. Her jaw set so hard I could see the muscle jumping beneath her skin. "You wrote this, didn't you?" "Mother," I asked. "It has your syntax. Unilaterally, lapse in judgment. That is your favorite phrase when you fire the housekeepers." "We had to be prepared," Diane whispered. She didn't deny it. "The audit is coming in 2 weeks. If they found the discrepancy, we needed a containment strategy." "I am not a strategy," I said. "I am your daughter." "You are a Miller," Diane snapped, her eyes flashing with sudden, desperate fire. "And Millers do what is necessary to protect the core. Blake is the face of this family. He is the one the donors love. He is the one who brings in the capital. You. You are the operator. You survive. You always survive. We thought you could handle the probation. We would have hired the best lawyers. You would have done 18 months in a minimum security facility, and when you came out, we would have set you up for life. 18 months, I repeated. The number hung in the air like smoke. You sat at dinner with me last Sunday. You asked me about my dating life. You passed me the salt. And the whole time, you had a document on your hard drive planning for me to go to prison for 18 months for a crime you committed. It was a contingency, Russell interjected. He stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Stella, please, be reasonable. We never wanted to use it. It was only if the auditors dug too deep. Look, we can fix this. How much do you want? $5 million. 10, I can move assets. We can set up an offshore account for you. You destroy the copies. You tell the police it was a misunderstanding, and you walk away wealthy. I don't want your money, I said. I want the truth on the record. You are destroying this family, Diane hissed. She moved toward me, her silver dress rustling like snake scales. You are going to stand there, in your discount dress, and tear down 100 years of legacy because your feelings are hurt. Do you have any idea what will happen tomorrow? The stock price? The reputation? The shame? You are doing this in front of everyone. I am not doing anything, I said calmly. I stopped covering for you. That is the difference. You think the absence of my silence is an attack. It is not. It is just the absence of a lie. If you cooperate, Diane said, her voice shifting gears, becoming smooth and transactional again. We can forget all of this. I will speak to the police chief. I will say I authorized Blake, and you can keep the apartment. We will sign the deed over to you for real this time. No more games. It will be yours. $1 million property in the city center. Just for being a good girl one last time. I laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound that startled me. The apartment, I said. You still think you have that card to play? I swiped my phone screen again. I brought up a PDF document I had pulled from the county clerk's office 2 days ago. This is a title lien abstract, I said. Dated 6 months ago, I zoomed in on the paragraph highlighted in yellow. Property address Unit 4B, The Kensington. Legal owner, Miller Community Trust. Status collateralized. I looked at Russell. Do you want to tell her? Or should I? Diane looked at Russell. Collateralized for what? Russell turned a shade of gray usually reserved for dead bodies. He loosened his bow tie, his fingers trembling. The tech venture, he mumbled. Blake's app, the one that was going to revolutionize logistics. The one that lost $3 million in the first quarter, I asked. The one you told the board was self-funded. He needed a bridge loan, Russell shouted. Defensive now. The bank needed hard assets. I couldn't use the hall. I couldn't use the commercial buildings, so I used the apartment. It was just temporary. You mortgaged my home, I said to Diane, to pay for Blake's failure. And you. I turned to Russell. You signed the papers. So even if you wanted to give me the deed, Mother, you couldn't. The bank owns it. If Blake misses one more payment, which he will, since he is currently in a holding cell, the foreclosure notice arrives next week. Diane turned on Russell slowly. The alliance was breaking. The survival instinct that had kept them united against me was now turning them against each other. You leveraged the safe house, Diane whispered. You idiot. You absolute fool. That was our fallback. That was where the shell company was registered. If the bank forecloses, they do an asset inventory. They would have seen the SM advisory mail. I had to, Russell yelled at her. He's your son. You're the one who spoils him. You told me to give him whatever he needed to succeed. Let him fly. Russell, that's what you said. Well, he flew right into a mountain, and I had to pay for the wreckage. I told you to guide him, not bankrupt us. Diane screamed back. I told you to teach him business, not give him the keys to the vault. He's incompetent, Russell roared. He has no head for numbers. He's just like you all, flash and no substance. Don't you dare speak to me like that. Diane spat. "I built this image. I organized these galas. I made you look like a philanthropist instead of a slumlord. I watched them. They were tearing at each other's throats, listing sins and failures, completely forgetting I was in the room. This was the reality of the Miller dynasty. It wasn't a kingdom. It was a snake pit." "Stop," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through their argument like a blade. They both stopped, chests heaving, eyes wild. They looked at me, remembering suddenly that the true threat was not each other. "It doesn't matter whose fault it is," I said. "The bank records are in the file I sent to the board of directors 5 minutes ago. The lien is public record. The embezzlement is documented. The frame-up project Stella is backed up on 3 different continents." "You sent it to the board," Russell whispered. The fight went out of him. He looked like a balloon that had been punctured. "Stella, tell me you didn't send it to the full board." "The board," I confirmed. "The external auditors, and the state attorney general's office." Diane staggered back and sat heavily on the small velvet bench used for changing shoes. She looked at her hands. "You killed us," she murmured. "You actually killed us." "I saved myself," I said. "There is a difference." I checked the time on my phone. "The police will be here in approximately 3 minutes to take your statements regarding the text message to Blake. I suggest you decide quickly which one of you is going to take the fall for the conspiracy charge. Because looking at the way you just turned on each other, I don't think United Front is going to work for you anymore." I walked to the door. I placed my hand on the brass handle. It was cool and solid. "Where are you going?" Russell asked. His voice was a ghost. "You can't leave us here. You're part of this. You're a Miller." I opened the door. The light from the hallway spilled in, cutting a bright rectangle across the dark carpet. "No," I said, looking back at them one last time. "I am not a co-conspirator. I am not a defendant. And as of tonight, I am not a victim." I met my mother's gaze. Her eyes were filled with a hatred so pure it felt like a physical blow. But I didn't blink. "I am the witness," I said, "and the prosecution is ready to start." I stepped out into the hallway and let the door close. The click of the latch was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I walked toward the ballroom, toward the music, toward the exit. I had no coat to retrieve. I had left everything from my old life behind in that room. The air in the hallway felt lighter. I took a deep breath. It tasted like oxygen, not expensive perfume and lies. I was homeless. I was jobless. I was an orphan in every way that mattered, and I had never felt more free. The silence I found in the hallway of Briarcrest Hall did not last long. By the time I was in the back of a ride share, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon and rain, the counteroffensive had begun. My family does not grieve. They litigate. They do not apologize. They attack. My phone lit up with a message from an unsaved number. It was short, brutal, and unsigned. "Improvisation is dangerous. Silence is free. Continue this, and you will lose more than just a roof." I stared at the screen. It was not my father's style. He was too wordy. It was not Blake's style. He was currently being fingerprinted. This was Diane. This was my mother stripped of her social graces, operating in pure damage control mode. She was trying to scare me back into the box. She thought I was a frightened daughter running away from home. She did not realize I was a field commander retreating to a secondary location to regroup. I did not reply. I took a screenshot, uploaded it to my encrypted cloud drive, and checked into a generic business hotel near the airport. I needed neutral ground. The real assault began at 7 o'clock the next morning. I woke up to the sound of my email inbox pinging relentlessly, but the first blow did not come from a lawyer. It came from my bank. "Alert, your secondary checking account has been frozen due to suspicious activity." I sat up, the hotel sheets cool against my skin, and dialed the fraud department immediately. I did not panic. Panic is for people who do not understand how systems work. I spoke to the representative in the flat, monotone voice of an operations manager handling a shipping delay. The representative told me that an anonymous report had been filed, alleging that my identity had been compromised and that the funds in my account were proceeds from wire fraud. The report had been filed using my own social security number and my mother's maiden name as the security answer. They were not just freezing my money, they were flagging me as a criminal within the banking system. If I tried to open a new account today, I would be rejected. If I tried to use my credit cards, they would decline. They were trying to starve me out. They wanted me destitute and desperate so I would crawl back to the negotiation table. I pulled up my laptop. I logged into the credit monitoring service I had subscribed to years ago, one of the few accounts my mother did not know about. I placed a total freeze on my credit reports. Then I called the bank back. "I am the account holder," I told the supervisor, my voice steady. "The report you received was a malicious attempt to leverage identity theft to freeze my assets. I can verify my identity via video call, passport, and biometric login. I am recording this call for future litigation regarding banking compliance. Please note, the time is 7:42 in the morning." The supervisor hesitated. He heard the word compliance and the specific legal phrasing I used. The Millers thought they could bully a bank. They forgot that banks are terrified of liability. By 8:15, my account was unlocked, and I had enabled two-factor authentication on a burner phone number my family did not possess. I poured a cup of terrible hotel coffee and opened the news. Blake was already controlling the narrative, or rather, the family's public relations firm was controlling it for him. A gossip column had run a blind item that was barely blind at all. "Trouble in paradise for a prominent philanthropic family. Sources say the daughter, long known for her instability and jealousy of her brother's success, staged a dramatic scene at a private gala last night. Insiders claim she lured her brother to her apartment under false pretenses to have him arrested in a fit of hysteria. My phone began to buzz with texts from people I used to call friends. These were people who drank my wine and laughed at my jokes, but who relied on my father's influence for their careers. "Stella, I heard about last night. Are you okay? Maybe you should apologize. You called the cops on Blake seriously. That is low. Even for you. Diane is devastated. You need to fix this. They were isolating me. They were painting me as the villain, the greedy, unhinged sister who wanted to destroy the golden boy. It was a classic smear campaign. If they could destroy my credibility, then my testimony about the embezzlement would just look like the rantings of a vindictive woman." Then came the legal hammer. At 9 o'clock exactly, an email arrived from a law firm I recognized. It was the firm my father used for his most aggressive acquisitions. Attached was a document labeled Notice of Occupancy, Termination, and Affirmation of Tenancy. I opened it. It was a formal letter stating that I had never been the owner of the apartment. It claimed I was a tenant at will, living there solely by the grace of the Miller Community Trust. But attached to the letter was a scanned document that made my blood run cold. It was an occupancy agreement, dated October 14th of last year. It outlined, in dense legalese, that I acknowledged I had no equity in the property, and that I agreed to vacate upon 48 hours' notice, and at the bottom of the page was my signature. It looked real. The loop of the S, the sharp cross of the T. It was a perfect specimen of my handwriting. I called the lawyer I had retained, a man named Vance who operated out of a small office in Queens and hated the Miller family on principle. "They have a document, Vance," I said, pacing the small hotel room. "It says I signed away my rights a year ago. If this holds up, the lock change wasn't illegal. It was just a landlord securing property." "Send it to me," Vance said. I forwarded the file. I stared at the signature on my screen. I zoomed in until the ink became pixels. October 14th. October 14th. I opened my calendar app. I scrolled back through the months. October 14th. I smiled. It was a tight, predatory smile. "Vance," I said into the phone. "Do you have the document open?" "I'm looking at it," Vance said. "It looks clean. Stella, this is going to be a problem." "Look at the date," I said. October 14th. "Now, I am going to send you a PDF of a boarding pass." I opened my travel folder. On October 14th, I was not in the city. I was not even in the state. I was in Chicago for an Iron Gate compliance seminar. I had flown out at 6 in the morning on the 13th and returned at 10 at night on the 15th. I sent the file. I was 3 states away when this document was allegedly signed in wet ink, I said. And I have the hotel receipts, the Uber logs, and the conference attendance sheet to prove it. Vance let out a low whistle. So it is a forgery, a scan job. It is the same signature they used for the SM advisory documents, I said. They are lazy. Vance, they reused the same digital asset. They thought I wouldn't check the date. They thought I would be so overwhelmed by the legal threat that I would fold. This isn't just a defense anymore, Vance said, his voice sharpening. Submitting a forged document to intimidate a witness, that is obstruction of justice. That is fraud, Stella. If we drop this on them, they are done. Not yet, I said. Let them think it worked. Let them think I am scared. I hung up. I needed them confident. I needed them to walk into the trap I had set for 8 o'clock this morning. I sat down on the edge of the bed and opened the audio file on my watch. I needed to hear it again. I needed to remind myself that this was not a misunderstanding. I put my headphones in. The sound of the gala filled my ears, the clinking glasses, the hum of conversation, the string quartet, and then the whisper. While everyone is here, tell your son to go change the locks at her apartment. I listened to it 3 times. The first time, I heard the betrayal. The second time, I heard the arrogance. The third time, I heard the intent. This was not an eviction. This was a command. My mother was not discussing property management. She was ordering a covert operation. And when combined with the text message on Blake's phone, burn the blue envelope, this audio clip was the bridge that connected the civil dispute to the criminal conspiracy. My computer dinged. A calendar notification popped up on the screen. Emergency board meeting, Miller Community Trust. Time, 8 o'clock in the morning. Location Trust Headquarters. Conference Room A. Organizer Stella Miller. I stared at the screen. I had sent the summons last night from the gala, right before Blake was arrested. In the chaos of the arrest and the confrontation in the coat room, I had almost forgotten. But the board members hadn't forgotten. My email tracking software showed that every single one of them had opened the dossier I sent. The external auditors had opened it. The legal counsel had opened it. My parents were probably walking into that conference room right now. They would be expecting to spin a story about a rebellious daughter. They would be armed with their forged occupancy agreement and their rumors about my mental health. They would be expecting to bully a confused board into silence. They were not expecting me. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I was wearing the same clothes from the night before, a navy dress that was slightly wrinkled, but I didn't care. I pulled my hair back into a severe bun. I washed my face with cold water. I looked tired. There were dark circles under my eyes, but I also looked dangerous. I looked like a woman who had nothing left to lose, which is the most dangerous kind of person in the world. My phone buzzed again. Another threat from a blocked number. Last warning. Withdraw the police report, or we release the medical records. They were going to fake medical records now. They were going to try to have me committed. It was desperate. It was sloppy. I picked up my bag. I checked for my hard drive. I checked for the backup phone. I typed a reply to the blocked number. See you in the boardroom. I walked out of the hotel room. The morning sun was bright and blinding, but I didn't squint. I had a meeting to chair. And for the first time in the history of the Miller Community Trust, the agenda was not going to be about charity, it was going to be about corrections. I hailed a cab. Where to? The driver asked. The financial district, I said. And hurry. I have a family reunion to attend. As the car merged onto the highway, I watched the skyline approach. Somewhere in that city, my brother was sitting in a cell, wearing an orange jumpsuit that cost less than his socks. Somewhere in a penthouse, my mother was screaming at a lawyer, and somewhere in an office tower, a group of powerful people were reading a 100-page document that detailed exactly how the Miller family fortune was really made. They wanted a fight. They wanted to use paper, and laws, and reputation to crush me. They were about to learn that paper cuts can be fatal if you make enough of them. The conference room at the headquarters of the Miller Community Trust was designed to intimidate. It was a cavern of mahogany and glass, suspended 30 floors above the city, with a view that turned the streets below into abstract veins of gray and yellow. Usually, this room smelled of fresh coffee and expensive cologne. Today, it smelled of ozone and anxiety. I walked in at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. I was not late. I was not early. I was precise. My parents were already there. They sat at the head of the long table, flanked by their personal attorneys. Diane looked tired. Her makeup applied a little too heavily to cover the sleepless night, but she held her head high. Russell looked belligerent, his jaw set in a line of stubborn denial. Around the table sat the 7 members of the board of directors, men and women who had known me since I was a child, who had attended my graduation, and who were now looking at me as if I were a stranger carrying a grenade. I did not sit down. I did not say hello. I walked straight to the podium at the far end of the room and connected my laptop to the main projector. "Good morning," I said. My voice was not the voice of a daughter. It was the voice of the operations manager. "Thank you for convening on such short notice. We are here to discuss a significant variance in the Trust's fiduciary compliance." Stella, Mr. Henderson, the chairman of the board, interrupted. He was a kind man in his 70s who had always given me peppermint candies when I visited the office. Now, he looked pained. "We read the email you sent last night. These are heavy accusations. Are you sure this is the appropriate forum? Perhaps this should be handled privately, with your parents." "This is not a family dispute, Mr. Henderson," I said, typing my password into the console. "This is a forensic audit, and given that the trust is a registered nonprofit entity subject to federal oversight, privacy is no longer an option. Liability is the only metric that matters now." I hit enter, the screen behind me filled with a complex flowchart. It was a spiderweb of red lines connecting the trust's main operating account to a single, obscure entity, SM Advisory. "For the past 3 years," I began, using a laser pointer to circle the central node, $2.4 million has been siphoned from the trust's endowment. These funds were categorized as strategic consulting and vendor retainers. The invoices were generated on a monthly basis, usually for amounts just under the threshold that triggers an automatic external review. I clicked to the next slide. It showed a side-by-side comparison of signatures. On the left, you see my verified signature from my employment contract. On the right, you see the digital stamp used to authorize these payments. Please note the pixelation around the curvature of the S. This is a static image file, copied and pasted. I did not sign these checks. I was not even in the country for 12 of them. "This is ridiculous," Russell barked, standing up. "She is the operations manager. She controls the back end. She set this up herself to embezzle the money. And now that we caught her, she is trying to blame us." The board shifted in their seats. They looked at Russell, then at me. It was the Miller reputation against the word of the invisible daughter. I could see the doubt in their eyes. They wanted to believe Russell. It was easier to believe that one bad apple had spoiled the bunch than to accept that the whole tree was rotten. "If I were embezzling money," I said calmly, "I would not have used an IP address registered to Briarcrest Hall." I clicked again. The screen displayed a wall of server logs. Every single authorization for SM Advisory originated from the residential network at my parents' estate, specifically, from the desktop computer in the library and, on 4 occasions, from a mobile device registered to Blake Miller. "That proves nothing," Diane said, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. "You visit the house all the time, Stella. You could have used our computers. You are trying to frame your brother because you are jealous of his appointment to the board." She turned to Mr. Henderson, her eyes glistening with tears that I knew she could summon on command. "Arthur, you know Blake. You know he's a good boy. He would never steal. Stella has been unwell. She's been paranoid lately. We tried to get her help, but she refused. It was a good performance. A solid B+. Mr. Henderson looked sympathetic. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Stella, the IP address is circumstantial. If you were in the house, you could have done it. And frankly, bringing this to the board before going to your father, it does seem vindictive. I expected you to say that, I said, which is why I am not asking you to take my word for it. I am asking you to look at the timeline of last night. I pressed a key. The video feed from my apartment foyer appeared on the massive screen. The room went silent. They watched in high definition as Blake Miller, the good boy, walked down my hallway with a locksmith. They watched the lock being drilled. They watched him enter. This footage was taken at 9:12 last night, I narrated, my voice clinical. At this time, I was at the gala. Standing 10 feet away from most of you, Blake was not securing the apartment. He was breaching it. I switched to the camera view from inside the office. The board watched as Blake ripped open the drawers. They watched him pry open the safe with a letter opener. They saw the desperation in his movements. It did not look like security. It looked like a raid. "Why, Mr. Henderson asked softly. "Why would he do this?" "Because they needed to scrub the scene," I said. "They knew the audit was coming. They needed to plant evidence that would tie me to the shell company. And they needed to retrieve the one thing that could sink them." I paused. The blue envelope. I clicked to the next slide. It was the photo of the text message on Blake's phone. "Don't forget the blue envelope in the bottom drawer. Burn it." "Russell," Mr. Henderson said, his voice hardening. "What is in the blue envelope?" Russell sat down slowly. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. He didn't answer. "I can tell you what they thought was in it," I said. "They thought it contained the original wet ink incorporation papers for SM Advisory, the ones where they practiced forging my signature. They kept it as leverage, a fail-safe to blackmail me if I ever tried to leave. But they made a mistake." I walked around the podium and stood in front of the table. "I found that envelope 6 months ago," I said, "and I swapped the contents." A gasp went through the room. Diane's head snapped up, her eyes wide with genuine shock. The papers inside that envelope, the ones Blake was sent to destroy, were high-quality photocopies, I explained, but they were printed on paper stock that I had watermarked with a unique, invisible tracking code. If Blake had burned them, nothing would have happened, but if he had moved them, if he had tried to plant them, that watermark is registered to a printer that sits in my office at Irongate, not my home. It would have proven that the documents were planted after the date of the alleged incorporation. I looked at the board. "I set a trap, gentlemen, and they walked into it with a drill and a locksmith." "Why change the locks?" a board member named Sarah asked. She was a sharp woman, a former prosecutor. "If they just wanted the envelope, why lock you out?" "Because there are only 2 places they wanted me to be," I answered, meeting her gaze. "Silent or in handcuffs. By changing the locks, they established a narrative of eviction. They wanted to claim I was a squatter in a property owned by the trust, making anything found inside admissible as evidence of my misconduct. They wanted to turn my home into a crime scene where I was the suspect." "It is a lie," Diane screamed. She stood up, knocking her chair over. The tears were flowing freely now, but her face was twisted in ugly rage. "She is lying. She is sick. She hates us. Look at her. She is enjoying this. She wants to ruin her own family." She looked around the room, pleading with her eyes. "Arthur, Sarah, please, you know us. We built this trust. We gave millions to the city. Are you going to let this ungrateful child destroy everything we have worked for?" I stood perfectly still. I did not flinch. I did not defend myself. I let her scream. I let her show them exactly who she was when the mask slipped. In a boardroom, emotion is not currency, it is liability. "Tears do not alter server logs, Mother," I said softly, when she finally stopped to take a breath, "and screaming does not delete text messages." "She embezzled it," Russell shouted, slamming his fist on the table. He was purple with exertion. "I have proof. We have a witness who saw her with the cash. We have documents. You have forged documents," I corrected. "And as for my finances," I pulled a sealed envelope from my briefcase and slid it down the long mahogany table toward Mr. Henderson. "This is an affidavit from an independent forensic accounting firm," I said. I hired them 3 months ago to audit my personal finances. They tracked every cent I have earned and spent for the last 5 years. My income comes solely from my salary at Irongate. My savings are consistent with that salary. There are no unexplained deposits. There are no offshore accounts. I am clean. Mr. Henderson opened the envelope. He put his glasses back on. He read the summary page in silence. He passed it to Sarah. She read it and nodded slowly. "It appears," Mr. Henderson said, his voice grave, "that the only irregularities are found in the trust's accounts, not Stella's." "This is a hostile takeover," Russell sputtered. "You can't do this. I am the chairman." "Not anymore," Sarah said. She closed the folder and placed her hands flat on the table. "Russell, Diane, in light of the evidence presented, specifically the text message directing the destruction of evidence and the video of unauthorized entry, I am moving for an immediate suspension of your executive powers pending a full external investigation." "Seconded, Mr. Henderson said immediately. "You can't," Diane shrieked. "We own this board." "You serve at the pleasure of the board," Henderson corrected. "And right now, you are a massive liability. If the Attorney General sees this evidence before we self-report, we are all complicit. We have to get ahead of this." "All in favor?" Henderson asked. 7 hands went up. It was unanimous. The reign of Russell and Diane Miller ended not with a bang, but with a show of hands in a quiet room. "Motion carries," Henderson said. He looked at my parents. "Russell, Diane, I must ask you to vacate the premises. Your access badges have been deactivated as of—" He checked his watch. "5 minutes ago. Security will escort you out." Diane looked at me. If looks could kill, I would have been vaporized on the spot. But she didn't say anything. She gathered her purse with trembling hands. She tried to muster some dignity, adjusting her scarf, but it was too late. The illusion was shattered. Russell looked at the table, defeated. He stood up slowly, looking 20 years older than he had when he walked in. As they were escorted out by the building's security men they had likely hired, the room fell silent again. "Stella," Mr. Henderson said, turning to me. He looked exhausted. "We will need to turn this dossier over to the district attorney. You understand that, once we do that, it is out of our hands. Your brother, your parents, they will likely face criminal charges." "I understand," I said. "We will also need a formal statement from you," Sarah added. "Regarding the intent, the police have the breaking and entering, but to make the fraud charges stick, we need to prove that the lock change was part of a larger scheme to frame you. We need the connecting tissue." I nodded. "I can give you that." "Do you have it now?" Henderson asked. I thought about the audio file on my watch, the whisper, "Tell your son to go change the locks." That was the final piece. The lock change wasn't just a landlord dispute. It was the activation signal for the cover-up. "I have it," I said. "But I think the police should hear it at the same time you do. It completes the narrative." "Very well," Henderson said. "We will call the district attorney's office. Stella, I am sorry. I truly am." "Don't be," I said, closing my laptop. "The truth is a correction. Mr. Henderson, it is only painful if your books are unbalanced." I unplugged the HDMI cable. The screen went black, erasing the evidence of my family's crimes. But the image was already burned into the minds of everyone in the room. I had won the battle in the boardroom. Now, I just had to survive the war in the courtroom. And I had one last card to play to make sure my mother never tried to rewrite this history again. The adrenaline of the board meeting was fading, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of a closing argument. I sat in a quiet alcove of the building's lobby, my phone resting on my knee. Upstairs, security was likely supervising my parents as they packed personal items from the executive suite, a humiliation that would take at least an hour. They were cornered, stripped of their titles, and facing an investigation, but they were not yet finished. People like Diane and Russell Miller do not believe in checkmate. They believe in overturning the board. They believe that if they can just exert enough pressure, enough guilt, or enough money, The laws of physics will bend in their favor. They were probably already plotting a countersuit, a media blitz, or a way to paint me as the unstable daughter who manipulated the evidence. I needed one last thing. I had the digital footprint. I had the video. I had the text messages. But I needed the confession. I needed them to say the quiet part out loud. Not in a text, but in a voice that a jury could hear and a mother could never deny. I typed a message to my mother. I composed it carefully, stripping away the victory I had just won and replacing it with the fatigue of a daughter who was scared of being alone. I am tired. I cannot fight the bank and the press alone. I will sign a non-disclosure agreement and retract my statement to the board if you sign over the deed to the apartment for real and stop the smear campaign. I just want my home back. I hit send. It was the perfect bait. It played to her narcissism. It confirmed what she already believed, that I was weak, that I was obsessed with small things like an apartment, and that ultimately I could be bought. The response came 30 seconds later. Come to your father's private office. 10 minutes. Come alone. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I walked out to the curb where Vance, my attorney, was waiting in a black sedan. He rolled down the window. Are you sure about this, Stella? He asked. We have enough. The district attorney is already drafting the warrant based on the board's referral. We have enough for a fraud charge, I said, leaning in. But I want the conspiracy charge to stick. I want there to be absolutely no doubt that the lock change was a premeditated act to destroy evidence, not just a landlord dispute. I need her to say it. I tapped the lapel of my blazer. Beneath the fabric, pinned securely to my blouse, was a high-fidelity audio recorder. It was not a hidden wire in the sense of a spy movie. In this state, as long as one party consents to the recording me, it is admissible. But more importantly, Vance was witnessing my entry. I will be right outside the door, Vance said. If I hear shouting, I am coming in with the building security. You won't hear shouting, I said. You will hear negotiation. That is their language. I took the elevator back up. The ride was smooth and silent. I watched the numbers climb 20, 30, 35. This was the ascent to the summit. But I wasn't going there to plant a flag. I was going there to trigger an avalanche. The executive suite was in disarray. Boxes were stacked on the leather sofas. The receptionist was gone, dismissed or hiding. I walked straight to the double doors of my father's inner sanctum and pushed them open. Russell was pacing by the window, a glass of scotch in his hand, even though it was not yet 9 in the morning. Diane was sitting behind his massive desk, looking like a deposed queen who refused to leave the throne. She was not crying anymore. Her eyes were dry and hard as flint. I closed the door behind me. I stood there, clutching my purse like a shield, letting my shoulders slump slightly. I needed to look beaten. So, Diane said, her voice dripping with disdain. The prodigal daughter returns. I knew you would break. You never had the stomach for a real war. I just want it to stop, I said quietly. I saw the news reports. I saw the frozen bank account. I can't live like this. You chose this, Russell snapped, turning from the window. You walked into that boardroom and humiliated us. Do you have any idea how many calls I have received? The stock is down 4% in an hour. I didn't want to humiliate you, I lied. I just wanted you to stop using my name, and I wanted my apartment. You locked me out. Dad, you sent Blake to drill the lock. We had to. Diane slammed her hand on the desk. You were acting erratically. We couldn't trust you. But why change the locks? I asked, stepping closer. Why not just ask me for the keys? Why send a locksmith in the middle of a party? Because you were going to leverage it. Diane stood up. She walked around the desk, closing the distance between us. She wanted to intimidate me. She wanted to loom. We knew the audit was coming. Stella, we knew you had access to the records. We couldn't let you hold that apartment hostage. So you broke in to protect the property, I asked, leading her gently. Stop playing stupid, Diane hissed. We didn't care about the property. We cared about what was in the desk. We changed the locks to get the blue envelope before you could give it to the board. We needed to sanitize that apartment before the auditor saw the address. There it was. She had just explicitly linked the illegal eviction to the destruction of evidence. She had admitted that the purpose of the lock change was to retrieve and destroy the incorporation papers of the shell company. It wasn't a landlord protecting an asset. It was a criminal securing a crime scene. But the envelope was empty, I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell the performance. We know that now, Russell muttered. He walked over to his briefcase, which was sitting open on a chair. Because you are devious. You tricked your own brother. He reached into the bag and pulled out a silver USB drive. He held it up like a holy relic. But you made a mistake, Stella, Russell said, a sneer spreading across his face. You think you are the only one who can find things. Blake found this. Before the police grabbed him, he managed to secure this drive from your safe. I stared at the drive. It was a generic brand, one I had bought in a pack of 10 at an office supply store a week ago. What is that? I asked. This, Russell said, is your death sentence. It contains emails from you to a competitor, emails discussing kickbacks. It proves that you set up SM Advisory to steal from us, and that we are the victims. I looked at him. I looked at the pathetic desperation in his eyes. He actually believed it. He believed that Blake had found a smoking gun, not realizing that Blake had simply panicked and grabbed a decoy. Dad, I said softly, plug it in. What? Plug it in, I repeated. If you are going to blackmail me with it, you should at least check the metadata. Russell hesitated. He looked at Diane. She nodded. Do it. Show her we have the leverage now. Russell walked to his desk. He plugged the USB into his laptop. He opened the files. See? He pointed at the screen. Kickbacks, wire transfers, all in your name. Right-click on the file, I said. Go to Properties. Look at the created date. Russell frowned. He clicked. He squinted at the screen. Created. He paused. Yesterday, 8:45 in the evening. And look at the author field, I added. Russell went pale. MacBook Pro Blake Miller. Blake didn't find that drive, I said, my voice dropping the facade of weakness. He made it. Or rather, he tried to create it on my laptop while he was breaking in. But he was so panicked he saved it to the thumb drive instead of the hard drive. He created the evidence of my guilt while standing in my office during a documented break-in. I took a step back. Straightening my posture, the slump was gone. The fear was gone. You have nothing, I said. You have a confession of intent to destroy evidence from Mom, and you have a clumsy attempt to frame me from Dad. You don't have a countersuit. You have a prison sentence. Diane stared at me. She realized, finally, that the trap had not been the text message. The trap was the room itself. She realized that she had just confessed to the very thing the board needed to hear. Her face twisted. It wasn't fear anymore. It was pure, distilled malice. You think you have won, she whispered. You think because you have some recordings and some logs that you are free. You are a Miller. Stella, without us, you are nothing. You will have no family, no inheritance, no invitations. No one in this town will touch you. She took a breath, drawing herself up to her full height. If you walk out that door with that recording, she threatened, you will be dead to us. You will have no mother. You will have no father. You will be an orphan. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, who had dressed me in expensive clothes and paraded me around like a show pony, all while stealing my identity to launder money. You are threatening me with a reality I have lived in for 20 years, I said. What? Diane blinked. I didn't lose my family today. Mother, I said. I didn't lose it when I walked into the boardroom. I lost my family the moment you leaned over at the party and whispered to Dad. I stepped closer to her, invading her personal space for the first time in my life. When you whispered, I said, my voice steady and cold. You didn't worry about me being homeless. You didn't worry about me being safe. You only worried about your envelope. That was the moment I became an orphan. Today is just the paperwork. From the hallway outside, A heavy, rhythmic sound began to echo. It was the sound of multiple people walking in unison, hard soles on marble. It was a sound I recognized. Russell looked at the door. "Who is that?" "That," I said, "is the logical conclusion to your actions." The door handle turned, but before it opened, before the chaos of the arrest began, I held up my hand. "Wait," I said to them. "Before they come in, there is one last thing you need to hear. You need to know exactly why this is happening. It isn't because of me. It is because of you." I reached for my phone. I tapped the screen. I turned the volume all the way up. "What are you doing?" Diane asked, her voice rising in panic. "I want you to hear your own voice," I said. "I want you to hear the sound of the bridge burning." I pressed play. The audio filled the silent office, the ambient noise of the gala, the clink of crystal, and then, clear as a bell, the whisper that started it all. "While everyone is here, tell your son to go change the locks at her apartment." Diane went white. She stared at the phone as if it were a weapon. "You recorded it," she whispered. "At the party." "I record everything," I said. "I'm the compliance officer. Remember?" The door burst open. Vance stood there. Behind him were two detectives from the Financial Crimes Division, and behind them, a uniformed officer. "Russell Miller?" "Diane Miller," the lead detective said, stepping into the room. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, grand larceny, and tampering with evidence." Russell dropped the USB drive. It clattered on the floor, a tiny plastic sound that marked the end of an era. Diane didn't move. She just looked at me. For a second, I thought she might scream. I thought she might beg. But she just stared, her eyes empty, realizing that the good girl who handled the small things had just handled the biggest thing of all. I turned off the recording on my chest. I looked at the detective. "They are all yours," I said. I didn't stay to watch the handcuffs go on. I didn't need to see it. I had the memory of their faces when the audio played, and that was enough. I turned and walked toward the open door, past the police, past the lawyer, and out into the hallway where the air was still and quiet. The recording ended, but the echo of my mother's whisper seemed to hang in the air of the executive suite like smoke. That single sentence, "Tell your son to go change the locks at her apartment," was no longer just a memory that haunted me. It was now a digital artifact, a piece of forensic evidence that bridged the gap between a family dispute and a criminal conspiracy. For 3 seconds, the room was absolutely silent. The two detectives stood like statues near the door. Vance, my attorney, adjusted his cuffs with the satisfied air of a man who had just watched a guillotine blade drop perfectly into place. Diane stared at the phone in my hand. Her face was not pale. It was translucent. She looked as though her blood had simply stopped moving. She did not look at the police. She did not look at her husband. She looked at the device that had captured her voice, the voice she had always used to command, to manipulate, and to destroy, and which had now turned against her. "That is the final piece," Vance said, his voice cutting through the silence. He walked forward and placed a heavy file folder on the desk, right next to the decoy USB drive Russell had dropped. "Gentlemen, what you just heard establishes the intent. The lock change at Ms. Miller's residence was not a landlord securing property. It was a calculated maneuver to secure a location for the purpose of destroying evidence." "This is entrapment," Russell croaked. He was leaning against the bookshelf, holding his chest as if his heart were trying to escape his ribs. "She recorded us without permission. That is illegal. It is a one-party consent state." "Russell," Vance corrected him, his tone bored. "And since Stella is a party to the conversation, and the conversation took place in a semi-public venue, the recording is fully admissible. But that is just the cherry on top. We have the rest of the cake right here." Vance opened the file. He laid out the documents one by one, snapping them onto the mahogany surface like playing cards. 1, Vance counted. The log from the smart lock proving unauthorized entry by Blake Miller. 2, The text message from Diane Miller directing Blake to burn the contents of the blue envelope. 3. The folder structure from Blake's laptop labeled Project Stella, containing the drafted confession intended to frame my client. And 4. The metadata from the USB drive you are currently standing next to, proving it was created during the break-in. The lead detective stepped forward. He was a tall man with tired eyes who had likely seen enough white-collar crime to know exactly what desperation smelled like. He looked at Diane. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "we have a warrant to seize all electronic devices in this office. We are also placing you and your husband under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and tampering with a witness." "You can't arrest me," Diane whispered. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of disbelief, as if the detective had told her that gravity had stopped working. "I am Diane Miller. I run this city's charity circuit. I am the trust." "You are a suspect," the detective said. He reached for his belt. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." "Wait," Russell said, pushing himself off the bookshelf. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "The blue envelope. She stole it if we are going down for tampering with evidence. Then so is she. She admitted she swapped the contents, that is theft of company property." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that felt like a release valve opening in my chest. "I didn't steal anything, Dad," I said. "And this is the part you really need to understand before you get in that squad car. The blue envelope you were so desperate to burn, the one Blake broke into my house to find." I walked over to the desk. I looked down at my mother, who was still sitting in her chair, gripping the armrest so hard her knuckles were white. "It contained copies," I said. "High-resolution color photocopies. I swapped them out 3 weeks ago." Diane's eyes snapped to mine. "Copies. The original incorporation papers for SM Advisory." I continued. "The ones with the wet ink where you practiced forging my signature. The ones that prove you set up the shell company 18 months ago, I gave those to the independent auditors last Monday." Diane made a sound in her throat, a strangled gasp of realization. "They have had them for a week," I said. "The auditors, the forensic accountants, and the district attorney, they have the originals. The envelope in the apartment was just bait. I wanted to see if you would try to destroy it. I wanted to see if you would break the law to cover your tracks." I leaned in closer. "And you did. You sent your son to break down a door to burn a stack of Xerox paper. You committed a felony for nothing." The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her face crumpled. It wasn't sorrow. It wasn't remorse. It was the sheer, crushing weight of being outsmarted by someone she considered an inferior intellect. She had played chess against me thinking I was a pawn, not realizing I had been the one designing the board the entire time. "You," Diane breathed. "You ungrateful, vicious little—" "Ma'am, stand up," the officer said. Grabbing her arm, Diane jerked away. She stood up, but she didn't look at the officer. She looked at me. And in that moment, the mask fell away completely. There was no mother left in those eyes. There was no love, not even the twisted, controlling kind she usually offered. There was only the cold, appraising look of a merchant looking at a broken product. She looked at me as if I were a defective asset, a bad investment that should have been written off years ago. "I gave you everything," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I gave you a life. I gave you a career, and you sell us out for what? For the truth. The truth doesn't pay the bills. Stella, you will rot in mediocrity without us." "I would rather rot in mediocrity than shine in a prison cell," I said. The officer spun her around. The click of the handcuffs was loud and metallic. It was the sound of a lock engaging, but this time, it was a lock she couldn't open. Russell was already cuffed. He was crying now, soft, pathetic sobs that shook his shoulders. He looked at me with wet, pleading eyes. "Stella," he blubbered, "please, we are family. You can't let them take us. Blake is already in jail. If we go, who is left? We are the Millers. Family protects family." I looked at him. I remembered the text message he sent. "Go to the apartment. Handle it. I remembered the way he had stood on the stage last night, beaming while his wife called me a glorified secretary. You are right, I said. Family protects family. I paused, letting the words hang there. But family doesn't change the locks to steal the truth, I said. Family doesn't frame their daughter for embezzlement to save their son. You didn't treat me like family. Dad, you treated me like a scapegoat, and scapegoats eventually learn to kick down the fence. Let's go, the detective said. They began to march them out. Diane walked with her head high, refusing to look at the employees gathering in the hallway. But the illusion of power was gone. She was just a woman in a silver dress with her hands cuffed behind her back, walking toward an indictment. Russell stumbled, held up by the officer, a man whose legacy had just been reduced to a case number. As they reached the door, the receptionist's phone rang. It was a lawyer, likely Blake's defense attorney, calling to say that Blake was trying to retract his statement, trying to take the fall to save his parents. Vance checked his phone and shook his head. Too late, he murmured to me. Blake is trying to claim he acted alone, but with the text messages from Diane and the recording of the whisper, the conspiracy charge is bulletproof. His lawyer can't save them now. I watched them disappear into the elevator. The doors slid shut, cutting off Russell's sobbing and Diane's glare. The office was quiet. We need you to sign the chain of custody forms for the digital evidence, the detective said, handing me a clipboard. And the formal statement regarding the recording. I took the pen. My hand was steady. I signed my name, Stella Miller, at the bottom of the page. It felt different this time. It wasn't a signature on a fraudulent invoice. It wasn't a signature on a fake lease. It was my name, claiming my truth. Thank you, Ms. Miller, the detective said. We will be in touch regarding the trial dates. I will be ready, I said. I handed the clipboard back. I picked up my purse. I looked around the office one last time. It was a beautiful room, full of expensive things and empty promises. I felt absolutely nothing for it. Do you want a ride? Vance asked. The press is probably swarming the lobby by now. No, I said. I'll take the service exit. I need to walk. I left the office. I didn't look back. I took the freight elevator down to the alleyway. Bypassing the cameras and the questions, I stepped out into the cool morning air. The city was loud and chaotic, indifferent to the drama that had just played out on the 30th floor. I walked for 10 blocks. I didn't know where I was going, and for the first time in my life, that was okay. I didn't have a schedule. I didn't have a compliance report due. I didn't have a mother whispering orders in my ear. I stopped in front of a coffee shop. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened the smart home app. The screen showed the status of the downtown apartment. Locked. I tapped the settings menu. I scrolled down to the user list. Admin Diane Miller. User Russell Miller. User Blake Miller. I selected Diane Miller. I tapped Remove User. I selected Russell Miller. I tapped Remove User. I selected Blake Miller. I tapped Remove User. The list was empty. I went to the master access settings. I typed in my name, Stella Miller. I scanned my thumbprint. The app asked for confirmation. Are you sure you want to reset all administrative privileges and issue new digital keys? This action cannot be undone by previous users. I looked at the screen. This was it, the physical manifestation of my freedom. They had changed the locks to keep me out. I was changing them to keep me safe. I pressed confirm. A small green checkmark appeared on the screen. Success. Access updated. I locked the phone and slipped it into my pocket. A smile touched my lips. Not a polite smile, not a dutiful smile, but a real one. I hailed a cab. Where to? The driver asked. Home, I said. Take me home. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and justice. It's a wild ride when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed seeing Stella turn the tables on her toxic family, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button to support the video, and smash the hype button so we can get this story out to even more people who might need a reminder that the truth always wins. See you in the next story.